Well, hello and welcome to a special edition of CT Sports Now on the Vantage Sports Network. This isn't our typical show where we're going over highlights. This is an issue-oriented show, and we brought in guys who, well, all they do is cover sports. They have, you said
no, they don't. They don't. You know, no offense. I'm Mark Robbins. Dave Ruden joining us from the Ruden Report. Kyle Brennan joining us from the Republican American, the newspaper based out of the city of Waterbury and covering that great metropolis. So we thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So you guys are covering sports all year round and a lot of issues. Dave, let's start with you because we're moving. We've got spring sports going on now. You got to be up to your ears in lacrosse with your Ruden Report focusing on the FCX.
Yeah, it's obviously lacrosse is one of the best played sports in the state, especially in the FCX. And a lot of the same powers are going to be the big players again this year, but the league is looking as both boys and girls as if it's going to be as strong as it has been.
Yeah, when you say power, I mean the first name I think of is Darien because they have had the most success most recently. But over the years, Darien, New Canaan, Wilton, you go through the FCX list, especially in southwestern Connecticut. Again, the reason is these kids are just born with sticks in their hands in these towns, or
I think that's basically it. You have a couple of pioneers back in the 90s, like Guy Witten at Wilton, Howard Benedict at New Canaan. So everybody in the FCX was playing lacrosse before everybody else. And then it's just almost like the youth soccer boom was when we were all growing up. And now it's just become teams that are really on a national level. We're not just talking best teams in the state, but we're talking Darien, we're talking New Canaan, we're talking Wilton, Greenwich, we're talking Ridgefield.
What has Jeff Braymeyer done to elevate what those pioneers you were talking about started?
I think he just really had a vision for the program, and it's become a self-perpetuating machine. I know we were talking a little bit before we came on here, but I think you can make a valid argument right now that the Darien Lacrosse program, what they've done over the last 3 years, in terms of a historical perspective in the FCX, one of the best teams ever in FCX history over the years, any sport. When you look at how many players are going to play at major D1 schools and who they've beaten to win their last 3 state titles, 4 or 5 really good teams in the FCX, and then a really competitive out-of-state schedule. They're going to play Niskayuna again. They play the best in Long Island. So I think impossible to tell, but what Darien's done the last 3 years is just, I don't remember anything like this.
It's a sport associated with wealth for whatever reason. I mean, I know the origins of lacrosse aren't about that, but so it almost seems fitting that Lower Fairfield County seems to be the dominant programs in lacrosse. I think that we could be seeing a change over time as lacrosse gains in popularity, where we could be seeing kids who don't want to get out and play football because of the head injury issues in football will gravitate toward lacrosse, and we could see this kind of growing in areas that aren't necessarily associated with great wealth. Is that something you hear in the lacrosse circles?
To be quite honest, it's happening right now, but nobody knows about it, and that's because of the strength up top. You're looking at Fairfield. Fairfield lacrosse has gotten much better. You have a couple of guys like Mike Nazaro in Stanford. Stanford and West Hill lacrosse has gotten much better. It's really league-wide. It's gotten better. The problem is the 4 or 5 programs that we're talking about up top are so good that people aren't really noticing what everybody else is doing. And you sort of feel bad for them. They're playing well. They're playing much better. They're spending year-round in the facilities indoors, and they're just not seeing the success because they haven't caught up to those top 5 programs yet.
But I see with all, you look at a school like Hillhouse necessarily with a state championship in football, a state championship in basketball, a state championship track and field, obviously tons of great athletes there. I think it's just a matter of time before we see a school like Hillhouse producing great lacrosse programs.
Yeah, let's bring in Kyle and ask, because you're in one of those areas. Waterbury is not known for heavy lacrosse. Do you hear rumblings, or have you seen improvement in some of the programs in that area?
Well, they're adding programs to it. Wolcott High School just began its girls lacrosse program. They played their first ever varsity game recently to start this spring. Lewis Mills in the greater Waterbury area has had a team for a number of years. But you see when you get to the state tournament level that a team like Lewis Mills, a smaller school, just it can't compete with the smaller schools of established lacrosse playing areas like Fairfield County. You are starting to get that push to add more lacrosse teams. Watertown, Holy Cross, and Waterbury St. Paul, I believe, has a lacrosse team. So it is stretching out. Like you said, Noah, it's getting there. Whether it can ever catch up to the level that they're playing down on the Gold Coast, I don't think so. It's some of the best in the country down there. But it is growing definitely as an option for other kids to play in the spring.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit. You had a story in the paper recently about all of the changes we're seeing with football coaches. Yep. And listen, it's a job. Sometimes we've seen coaches, stay 30 years at a program, and a guy like Steve Filippone leaving Hand. But that's not necessarily why we're seeing so much change. No. So tell us about the story that you put out and some ideas around that.
Yeah, just thinking the other day, some of these rainy spring days, you start to delve into some other topics. And there's 143 football programs in Connecticut. And over the last 4 years, there have been 85 changes made at the head coaching level. Now, some programs have had more changes than others, not saying that all 85 programs have made changes, but there is a lot of turnover in high school football coaching at this time in history. And I've talked to some coaches about it, and what it really boils down to is it's just so much harder now to be a high school football coach than ever before. I mean, Dave, the pressure that these coaches face in Fairfield County. It's all over the state. It's really for a number of reasons too, not just the pressure to win, but you get the helicopter parents these days, that just if they bark to administration, which side administration is taking these days, for right or for wrong, and the coaches feel that pressure and they're upset by it. And that, a lot of the times, from what I've seen and from what I've talked to, is the reason that these coaches are only spending 2, 3, 4 years instead of, like you said, 25, 30, 35 years.
They've even gone after some coaches. You look at a guy like Rich Albanizio, who was at Greenwich for years.
I was just going to bring him up.
Right, and the parents were really angry. Well, we used to be winning state championships, and we're not winning state championships anymore. And it's like, if that's why you want him gone, that's a wrong reason to have him gone. If you want him gone because your kids aren't good kids and they're not getting something out of the program, but because you're not winning state championships, I'm sorry, you're going to get me fired up on this issue. Because it just makes me mad. And I'm not saying his replacement,
No, Johnny's doing a great job. That's not anything against Johnny, but it's almost like college football these days, where if you win 7 or 8 games, you're a failure because you're not winning championships. I think the bar is being set in the wrong place right now.
And it's all over. It's right in the middle of the valley, the Naugatuck Valley. With Naugatuck, that's happened with Coach Bruno. He left. He decided to leave because they weren't happy with his making the state tournament and winning 8 to 10 games every year, right?
Yeah, I fired up the Naugatuck people pretty good earlier this offseason. But that's an area that used to have, consistent success, 2 state championships, not anything off the map, but, solid every year, and they still were solid. But Naugatuck's an area that really values its tradition. It really values its 60s and 70s and 80s. There's a lot of longtime residents there in Naugatuck who, that, as I call them, the good old boys crowd, gets into the mayor's ear, gets into this ear, and they just decide we want to change. And great kids. I mean, Craig Bruno is an excellent coach, not only a football coach, but a great role model for these kids. And because there's, again, the certain parents get in this certain way, they get forced out. That's not the only reason. I mean, rules now are suffocating for these coaches. They find it awfully difficult to coach based on the practice limitations and everything that they have to deal with. So there's that, and there's just so many obstacles. And that's why you see, 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week throughout the season. That's why you see these coaches. They just, it's tough for them to take anymore.
And let's face it, a lot of them are doing this because they love coaching,
Absolutely.
They love the sport. Certainly one of the reasons they're doing it, it's not because of the financial rewards.
No.
I mean, they're getting paid, $4,000, $6,000 a year to do this, and they're working really hard, and then you're dealing with parents. These people have to understand that to get a Division I scholarship,
especially out of Connecticut, let's call a spade a spade.
yes, you have to be off the charts because you're competing with the kids out of Florida and Ohio and Texas and California because all of these programs everywhere are looking for the best kids.
Yeah. And what's become my biggest pet peeve, and I'm actually a girls lacrosse story I'm going to be writing later today, but when did Division I become the measuring bar for success? If you go and play Division III football and you go and get a good education, or Division III in any sport,
yes.
Sure.
People are saying, well, you only play in Division III. Only should not be in that sentence.
I agree.
I agree. Well, thank you guys so much. We could maybe this will have to be its own
I know.
half-hour show, but we're going to have to.
Didn't mean to get you fired up.
Thank
We'll
you.
have to table it.
That's good.
Yeah, we'll have to table this discussion for a little while. We're going to take a quick break, come back more with our special edition of CT Sports Now right after this.